Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to It's Rainmaking Time. This is Kim Greenhouse. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Dan Hill. He is the author of many blockbuster books that are changing the face of business around the world. Many people call his book a revelation. I've just completed the book Emotionomics, Leveraging Emotions for Business Success. He's also written a book called About Face, The Secrets of Emotionally Effective Advertising. And he has another book called FaceTime. He is the CEO of Sensory Logic at sensorylogic.com. He is changing our understanding of advertising, of sales, of understanding what it means to communicate with other beings, what it means to bring in business, and how brain science is changing everything we thought we understood about business. One of the other things I really love about his work is that when women say that they do things emotionally, and men say business is business, from the old model of business, Dan Hill is changing the paradigm. In fact, we make our decisions emotionally most of the time. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Dan Hill to It's Rainmaking Time. Good afternoon.
Thank you so much. It's a wonderful introduction, and I'm fascinated by the conversation we're about to have.
I am too. I want to talk about business is business for a moment, because everything you're writing, at least with Emotionomics, Leveraging Emotions for Business Success, is confirming that decisions are emotionally based, purchases are emotionally based, sales are emotionally based, advertising is emotionally based. What does this mean to us today?
There's a wonderful book called Descartes' Error by Antonio Damasio, which really helped spur me when I started the company. Descartes is, of course, most famously related with the comment, "I think, therefore I am." And as Damasio would point out, Descartes was dead wrong, and yet Western culture, and particularly Western business practices, have utterly followed Descartes for the last 300 years. It is not that I think and therefore I am, is that we have the capacity to smell, to detect odors. That is the origin of the brain, a small node atop the spinal column. We are overwhelmingly sensory, emotional creatures. Our rational capabilities came far later in life. And so there are two fundamental layers. The notion that we are supposedly supremely rational is just not possible. And secondly, often this assumption that somehow, yes, women are the emotional decision makers, but guys are rational computers who digest facts and spit out results. And it's not true. All of us are emotional decision makers. That's why I think the breakthroughs in brain science are so fascinating and so liberating about understanding how you're going to connect with people.
I think that alone is revelationary right there. Maybe men have been taught not to show how they feel, but it doesn't necessarily mean they don't feel when things are happening. So I think that's a major revelation. Bill Moyers called his half hour with you the most interesting half hour of social commentary on television. I think I understand why. Talk to us about the mistakes in advertisements.
Well, the first one, I think, is that you get caught up in a very rational approach that has historically been called being on message, that you're going to have this statement, this claim, then followed by that one and the next one, and you keep pushing each of these, and so supposedly if you build them up over the course of the commercial, you're going to have the devastatingly persuasive commercial. It doesn't work that way. First of all, human beings cannot take in the splattering of all these messages that often get jammed into a single commercial. We are tired. We are overwhelmed. We are moving quickly. The joke that has to be explained to you in life is never as funny as the joke you just get. Your emotional response happens 5 times faster than your rational reaction. So whether you engage people, whether you turn them on, whether they believe you, those are the emotional dynamics of advertising, and they are far greater in significance than being on message. I call it being on emotion. Do you create the right emotion at the right time in response to the right positioning to hit the right kind of audience? Emotional literacy is going to be the key to 21st century marketing because everybody feels saturated. But even in a saturated state, because your emotions are so much more vibrant in terms of how you make decisions, if you can reach that pager, you have a chance to succeed still.
It is said in your book that the ability and willingness to pay are often emotionally based. Tell us why that is.
Well, sure. I mean, ability to pay is supposedly finite, but I was in corporate life before. It's amazing if you get the right person in the company hierarchy involved in the project that suddenly the funds materialize. So you start out with this notion that I'm going to be a skinflint and hang on to my wallet or whatever. But the truth is, those things that matter to you, I mean, historically we know this as wants versus needs. Those things you really want and will make a difference about, suddenly you will spend the money. So there are implicit ways in which business has understood the role of emotions. There's customer satisfaction, for instance, but we have done it in such a pale way. And, again, you will spend the money on people that you trust and like. And if you apply this just moving outside of advertising to a sales situation, for instance, I think so often you think, okay, I'm going to get to the heart of the presentation. I'm going to lay out the facts. Then they will buy from me. There is plenty of evidence to show that meeting, whether it's an interview or a sales pitch, could be over in the first 15 seconds to 1 minute because you decide whether you fundamentally like, trust, and therefore will buy from somebody. We do not buy from people we don't trust, and we don't tend to like people we don't trust. So establishing the emotional connection from the get-go is actually far greater in significance than the substance of the presentation.
Is that mostly subconscious, establishing that emotional connection? How does that occur?
Well, I think a smart way if you're a salesperson is when you get to the room, notice not just how you're going to try to echo their volume of speaking or their word choices, but you can see it in how they dress. You can see it in what's on their desk, how they decorate their office. There's a wonderful joke from Oscar Wilde that said, only shallow people don't judge others based on appearances. And it's true. There is a wealth of information about someone through those signals. Understand, reflect, appreciate where they come from. You're going to be in a lot better shape.
What is going on with brain science today? And explain what the fMRIs are.
The breakthroughs in brain science, I mean, the single factoid that sent me down this journey was a quote that said that the conservative estimation was that 95% of people's thought activity wasn't fully conscious. I just saw in the New York Times 2 weeks ago that they've now put a really specific number to it, 98%.
Oh, my God.
In other words, most of what goes on for us happens on an intuitive, subconscious level, and it's the sensory and the emotional parts of your brain, the two oldest parts of your brain, that really function at that basis. So in business sense, I think it's just absolutely amazing. You're going to go for 2% market share of the brain instead of 98%? Who would possibly want to do that in a business practice? Likewise, the emotional part of the brain, which is about 200 million years old, sends 10 times as much data to the rational part of the brain, which is only 100,000 years old. So it's a trade imbalance. It's as if the emotional brain was China and the rational brain was Cuba. Now, if you're going to play the percentages, which one as a business person do you want to go to? You want to grow your business by operating on the intuitive, emotional basis. Now, what the fMRI brain scans are doing in all of this is helping to document how these three parts of the brain work. The brain is the last frontier. And we are recognizing that the brain is not a linear progression like business would like to imagine. It is more like a pinball machine. And there are all these neurons firing, connections forming at every moment. And you have to think about your brand and brand associations as a web, not a linear path.
When you talked about the oldest part of the brain, is that the hippocampus?
It is the sensory part of the brain, which is even older than the hippocampus. Then you're talking about the back of the brain, including the visual cortex.
Okay.
22.7% of the brain is exclusively devoted to processing visuals. That's why my company is called Sensory Logic, because visuals are so powerful and so important. You make, I believe, in advertising, for instance, the emotional connection through the imagery, and then you close the deal by giving what's been called the intellectual alibi, the reasons to believe, the rationalization, the justification, and you often do that through the words or the script. But you need the 1-2 punch that starts with the visuals. So you're starting there, and then you add in the limbic system, and that's where you got the amygdala